Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, honored guests, Secretary Clough, and members of the Smithsonian Congress of Scholars. Actually, when I say members of the Smithsonian Congress of Scholars, it includes many of the recipients of the Secretary's Distinguished Research Lecture Award. In more than 30 years at the Freer Sackler, Louise Cort has distinguished herself as the consummate researcher, consummate scholar, consummate curator. We're fortunate that she's chosen our museums as a base for her extraordinary endeavors. Grateful, too, that her work is being acknowledged by the Smithsonian by naming her the 12th recipient of the Secretary's Distinguished Research Lecture Award. In case anybody is counting, this actually marks the second time that this award has gone to a member of the Freer Sackler. The first, if any of you are not sure, actually went to my predecessor, Milo Beach. Whether Louise is working on an international exhibition, such as her Isamu Noguchi and Modern Japanese Ceramics, an exhibition that people still talk about, or an exhibition such as Gwyn Hansen Pigott's Parades, a small exhibition in the Freer that really was a marvelous juxtaposition of objects that had often really never been on show before. In either scale, Louise's work would make Charles Lang Freer proud. In 1892, Mr. Freer acquired his first ceramic, an 18th century Satsuma ware jar with underglazed blue decoration that reminded him of a Whistler landscape. That spark, that connection between cultures, is a quality that marks Louise's erudition and her curatorial expertise. More than 120 years after collecting that first Japanese ceramic, I believe that Charles Lang Freer, and of course Arthur M. Sackler, would be glad to know that their collections of ceramics have been in such, not good, but truly excellent hands. For Louise embodies those qualities that were so important to Freer when he began collecting, and more so when he established this museum. That is unparalleled scholarship coupled with aesthetic verve. But there are realms that Mr. Freer could not imagine. And of course, that's the digital. And next month, we'll be launching the museum's first app, and it's devoted to our collection of Korean ceramics at the Freer, as well as many other online features. Louise, once again, has been in the forefront, instrumental in helping bring that project together, at the same time as she produced a print book and re-envisaged the Gallery of Korean Ceramics under the title Cranes and Clouds, the Korean Art of Ceramic Inlay. Louise's accomplishments abroad are honors many, and her contributions to the field are vast. But I say the field, and while ceramics has been the center point, she has an extraordinary geographical range. She's worked on Indian earthenware. In fact, her book, The Temple Potters of Puri, was just published in 2012, the very same year that she received the 33rd Koyama Fujio Memorial Prize for her research on historical Japanese ceramics. That's an extraordinary geographical trajectory. On behalf of the entire Freer Sackler family, I'd like to extend heartfelt thanks and deepest congratulations. But one thing above all emerges about Louise's work. It's not just the objects, it's the people behind the objects that makes her work truly exceptional. So I'd like now to introduce David Dvorkin, the Senior Curator of Astronomy and Space Sciences at the National Air and Space Museum, a member of the Smithsonian Congress of Scholars, and significantly, chair of the nominating committee. So, David, thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this wonderful occasion. I wish it could be more than once a year. This past year, I've been honored to act as chair of the nomination committee for the Secretary's Distinguished Research Lecturer for 2012. We are a group of Smithsonian curators and scientists organized and enabled by the Smithsonian's Congress of Scholars. Our pan-institutional body of representatives, the Congress, represents all of the museums and units that carry out scholarly research. The goal of the Congress is to enhance communication among scholarly staff across the institution and to address issues of common concern to the Smithsonian research community. And I can certainly say from experience being on the committee, that has certainly been borne out in the collegiality and the warmth of our deliberations. Well, after SI-wide announcements were made early in the year inviting nominations this past year, we were very gratified to receive proposals from over a dozen individuals and groups spread over the entire institution, identifying truly exceptional and even transformational figures in their respective fields. Added to those names, carried over from previous 2 years, because as you know, we keep names active for 3 years. We've had, therefore, a very strong slate this year of 17 candidates. And it was a pleasure to read every one of those proposals and all of the support letters. And it was a challenge to deliberate over all of them as well. But as a result, we were successful in submitting 3 names to the Secretary's office as the selecting body. Now, the criteria included sustained achievements in research, long-standing investment in the Smithsonian, outstanding contribution to a field, research either broadening the scope of the discipline or substantially enhancing understanding within a field of study, and finally, ability to communicate research to a non-specialist audience. Well, I'm deeply grateful for the care, thoroughness, and camaraderie of the committee for their good work. This past year, the committee included Adrian Kepler, Bert Drake, Giovanni Fazio, Jason Stieber, representing the Congress, Catherine Ott, Ken Slowick, Tom Crouch, and William Wislow. I would now like to turn the podium over to someone who definitely does not need an introduction here, our secretary, who will introduce the 12th recipient of the Distinguished Research Lecture Award.
Thank you. Thank you, David. It's an honor for me to be here and participate in this ceremony. And so again, thanks to the committee for all the work that they did in recommending the 3 candidates to me. I can tell you every year I kind of look forward to getting those nominations, and I don't, because it is such a tough decision. There are so many outstanding people here at the Smithsonian. So thanks to you and thanks to the Congress of Scholars. We have a number of former winners or former presenters of this lecture here today, and I'd like for all of them to stand and be recognized. Former winners, And also thanks to Eva Pell, our Undersecretary for Science, and Richard Curran, Undersecretary for History, Art, and Culture, for their leadership and encouragement of high-level scholarship and research. So it's my privilege this afternoon to introduce the winner of this year's award, Louise Allison Cort. Louise is the 12th recipient of the Distinguished Research Lecturer Award. Now, 12th is a good number because I'm the 12th secretary, so that's a good number. Her career at the Smithsonian has been devoted to the kind of intensive, thoughtful research and scholarship that exemplifies this award, as David described. A cursory look at the list of Distinguished Research Lecturer Award winners reveals an impressive range and diverse range of expertise. It is that sheer breadth of scholarship that the Congress of Scholars recognizes. Research and scholarship underlies the Smithsonian, from music to ocean ethnology to astrophysics to Louise specialty ceramics. Ceramics is actually an ubiquitous material. It dates, we believe, to 24,000 years ago, before BCE, and is still one of the most useful substances around. Because of this, ceramic in many forms crosses the paths of our research in history, science, culture, and art. It's easy to forget just how prevalent ceramics are until you go into some of our museums. Visit the Stephen Udvar-Hazy Center, the Air and Space Center in Virginia, and you'll see the silica ceramic tiles that protected the Great Discovery on its multiple, 48 or re-entries, I think, to the Earth's atmosphere, more than 17,000 miles an hour. Check out the Hirshhorn and examine Chinese master artist Ai Weiwei's new exhibition, According to What? And there he uses ancient ceramic pottery as a means to question government authority and cultural norms. And recently, the National Museum of Natural History donated 22,000 pounds of ceramic fragments dating back 3000 BC for a simulated dig site for a Dead Sea Scrolls exhibition. And a poignant example of the way in which ceramic can be a cultural touchstone is found in the artwork of the noted Haitian artist, Chamin Joseph. The Haiti Cultural Recovery Project was able to save some of his ornamental ceramics in the aftermath of the Haiti earthquake, and I saw that when I visited there twice. It's an important task of cultural preservation necessary to maintain a nation's cultural identity. This effort was crucial because ceramics and other materials tell people's stories. They reveal the way people have lived, they have worked, marking the passage of time and revealing innovation. But without scholars like Louise, who can interpret these stories and share them with us and the world, materials would just lie dormant and just be relics of the past. Experts take pieces of ceramic, known as shards, and reassemble them into stories that have been lost to history. And that's just what Louise has been doing since she joined the Smithsonian in 1981. As a curator of ceramics for the Freer Sackler Gallery, Louise has been doing the kind of in-depth scholarship that we celebrate today. The work that we want to keep supporting and fostering at the Smithsonian, the kind of work that delves deeper and deeper and brings fresh perspectives to our world. Louise's impressive scholarship into Asian ceramics over her distinguished career include books, an online catalog devoted to the Southeast Asian ceramics in the Freer Sackler Gallery, and I would encourage you to visit her website if you have not, it's fantastic, and many, many scholarly articles. Shortly, she'll share some of her expertise with us in her lecture, People Making Pots, Connecting Present and Past in Japan, India, and Mainland Southeast Asia. But first, an order of business. We have to present Louise, to invite her to the stage to receive her well-deserved 2012 Distinguished Research Lecture Award. Louise? Piece of Smithsonite after our founder for you, and I was told we've had one in the past where these things weren't connected. Oops. And it got embarrassing when I'm told this actually holds together, so I don't know if I'd attest it too far.
Okay.
Now Louise is joined by her family, her brothers and sister-in-laws. Would they please, everyone else sit down? Would they please stand and let's recognize and welcome to the Smithsonian.
Thank you very much, Secretary Clough, Julian, David, colleagues, friends, and family. It's a little bit hard to get up here and start talking after such a warm welcome. It's also a bit daunting, although it's a great honor to receive this award. It was daunting to think about what it was that I would talk about to all of you. I'm used to pulling together data from my research to talk about such topics as the merchant as collector or the artist in Edo, to name just two recent conferences that I took part in. It's quite different to be assigned an open topic, as I understood it, talk about your research. And at the same time, it was a great pleasure to have the opportunity to step back and try to think for myself exactly what that research has been. And so what I'd like to do today is try to summarize what I did, why I did it, and what I learned from it, all circling around the topic of ceramics. And in particular, I'm going to talk to you about three long-term research projects which have, in a way, formed the backbone of what I've done. That helped to explain the what and the how of what I did. Each of these research projects has taken place in Asia. Each has involved intensive field work, spending a lot of time with people in living communities who make ceramics, and finding ways to use what I could see and learn from them to take that thread and go back into the history of their communities and find out what it was that had carried them along through time. The why of these things is harder to answer. It goes back from intention to a huge dose of chance. In my case, I can answer the question, why Asia, by saying that when I was a high school student, I applied for the American Field Service Exchange Student Program, and AFS, as it's known, and I actually wondered how many people here today might have been involved somehow in that program. I think it's affected a lot of people at impressionable ages. I hoped desperately to go to Italy or Germany. AFS said, Japan might be good for you. So I lived with this really very special family, and in the course of living there, day to day for a summer, became deeply interested watching my Japanese mother cook dinner in the kinds of tools she was using, how she was using them, why she was using them, baskets and knives and scoops and ladles, things I'd never seen before. And this formed a certain kind of predisposition to what I was looking at, how things were used, how things were done. But a bigger part of the chance that affected my research was the very fact that, thanks to this AFS experience, it started in Japan. Because starting in Japan had, I think, enormous significance to the way I've been taught by that experience to look at ceramics and think about them, even when in later research projects I've moved outside of Japan. First of all, Japan offers, through its long-standing practice of the tea ceremony, an organized system of looking at objects, thinking about how to assemble them, how to use them, how to enjoy that combination, how to appreciate the materials that they are made of and how those materials are juxtaposed to one another to make not only a functional set of tools, but a deeply pleasing aesthetic grouping. People in the tea ceremony come into a small, intensely focused, darkened room like this, and they sit there to enjoy the experience of drinking a cup of tea. The drinking of the bowl of tea is not simply using the bowl, but it's also contemplating that bowl once the bowl is emptied, thinking about the material, which is, of course, most of the time, ceramic. But beyond that system of close, intense looking, which has been established in Japan since the 16th century, there is a deep appreciation for the material of clay. And many of the ceramic vessels that are made for use in the tea ceremony, such as this Bizen water jar in the Freer collection, are made not simply of clay, but of unglazed clay. And the way of looking cultivated through the tea ceremony has encouraged people to enjoy that essence of clay that comes through in these wood-fired unglazed materials, the color of the clay of a certain place, the accidents of how the violence of the wood firing distorted the shape, threw ash up against the piece, drew out from the clay itself the color that we see as the finished surface. All of these features are part and parcel of the way ceramics are viewed in Japan, and it was a wonderful place to begin in the process of learning more about ceramics. But these vessels made for the tea ceremony, such as this water jar, have their roots in turn in much more practical sorts of vessels that were made at kilns in Japan from roughly the 12th or 13th century onward. There were many, many regional kilns that made jars like this one, which is another Bizen vessel, also in the Freer. Each of them had a particular color, particular texture, a particular repertory of form that in the 20th century, Japanese, looking back at the history of their ceramics, have come to appreciate deeply. And so it was natural, I guess, that I too was drawn to these sorts of jar forms above all other ceramic forms, in part because they're big, you can hold them, you can touch them without gloves, they're not fragile, they're sturdy, they've survived for hundreds of years. And best of all, with a jar like this, you can reach inside the neck and feel the fingerprints of the person who made this jar. And that kind of contact is really amazing. So as a graduate student, I gravitated toward a project with Japanese ceramics, and I chose a place called Shigaraki, which you can see on the map of Japan in the upper right-hand corner, lies not too far from the old capital city of Kyoto, and that had a lot to do with its destiny as a ceramic production area. I want to thank, by the way, Reid Hoffman, my colleague at the Freer and Sackler, for this wonderful map. But when I chose Shigaraki, I went into the project as an art historian. I was looking at the aspects of production in this one valley full of 18 villages of pottery-making households that had operated since the 13th century. The aspects of that production that were famous were, on the one hand, the large storage jars from the 13th to the 16th century, and on the other hand, the tea ceremony utensils, such as the bowl you see on the right, made in the 16th and 17th century. So there was a lot of history that was simply there as background to these magnificent ceramic products. And so while I began as an art historian, though, I have to say that I emerged from this project with a deep respect for ethnology, for anthropology, for archaeology, as ways of getting at what these and many other pots from Shigaraki were about. And I show you this image because it represents the really low point of my profound dismay as a beginning graduate student on the first day that I decided to move from the museums where I'd seen the jars and the tea ceramics and go out to the place where these were made. It was a cold day in March, it was raining, it was muddy. There was nothing around that had anything to do with what I imagined I would see, except for this one striped jar sitting in a doorway. And I took this image and never anticipated how much it would resonate even now for a moment that feels like a beginning of sorts in coming to terms with what this place, Shigaraki, was all about. Fortunately, 2 months later, I met the man who's standing on the left, Hirano Toshizo, who was the head of the local research institute. It was the place that did analysis of clays and glazes for the local pottery factories and trained the young potters who would take over the work there. And this wonderful man really helped open my eyes to the way to look at Shigaraki and figure out how it connected to its ceramics. Basically, he said, you know, everything you need to know is here. It's all here. All the evidence is here. You just have to look really carefully, and you have to look at everything, not just the evidence for the famous things from this place, but the evidence for everything. And in particular, he showed me ceramic shards from kiln sites, but at that point, these kiln sites were not identified. They hadn't been excavated. They hadn't been cleaned up. They were lying among the weeds on the hillsides, and you had to walk through those hillsides to find the evidence of the kilns. But as with this shard, you see both sides of it. You can look at the outside and how the firing affected its color. You can look at the inside and see those remnants of the coils that the potter put together to make the jar. Hirano-sensei also made me understand how the green striped jar in the muddy courtyard related to the jars I'd seen in museums by emphasizing that everything that had ever been made in this valley over 700 years was part of the story, such as this teapot from around 1900. And finally, because he was a potter himself, and here you see his kiln being fired in the particular village where he lived, he emphasized technology. And so when I went there to work seriously, he put me in touch with many of the veteran potters who made the wares that characterize Shigaraki in the modern day. Now, because of Shigaraki's clay, ever since the time when it made those unglazed storage jars, the strong point of this community of potters has been the capacity to make big containers. And the story of this process of how to use this clay is at the heart of the story of this place. Just one of the many men who knew very well how to make big pieces for storage of all sorts of things in the 1960s and 70s. The counterpart to the big jars was the wonderful big kilns that at that point were still being operated, wood-fired kilns that crawled up the hillsides under big black corrugated metal roofs. They looked like amazing, almost motels built under the roofs. They were so large with their multiple rooms entered from the side. And I spent many times watching the people who operated these kilns, walking, running up and down the sides of the kilns, going into those huge rooms that, as you can see on the right, were much taller than they were, stacking up the hundreds or thousands of pots to prepare for a firing. And then I also had the privilege of watching the firing, of watching these people quietly, calmly, very precisely and professionally stoking the wood into the kiln for 2 nights and 3 days. The people who did this kind of work were people like this. They'd been doing it all their lives. They were wonderful to get to know. And as I got to know these people and their welcoming faces, I started to realize that I could read them back into the past, as, for example, in these sketches that were made in Shigaraki in 1872 as part of a report to the new Meiji government about what was going on in the industrial centers of Japan. And that people who looked like this probably were the people, the farmers, the woodcutters who, in their spare time, built the very first kilns in Shigaraki, kilns that you now see properly excavated by archaeologists, and began to make jars in this valley. So the history of Shigaraki, therefore, is the story of people who figured out how to use a local resource to make big containers, and then over time, as things changed, figured out how to change with that and to adapt the big jars they were making to the requirements of the new age. So these unglazed stoneware jars that were made from the 13th to the 16th century, roughly, went out of fashion when glaze became popular. But Shigaraki potters figured out how to make glaze and how to make, in particular, tea jars, jars for storing and shipping and selling tea leaves from a nearby center for tea growing, this town of Uji. Other potters figured out how to make more lively and attractive glazes when they were making large jars that were sold in sets to commercial shops in towns that would line these jars up in their storefront as a kind of banner for whatever product they were selling, rice crackers or tea or something else. And there's one of those green and white jars that I first saw on my first visit. In the 20th century, up until the decade or so after the end of World War II, Shigaraki provided the whole country of Japan with the means to heat its houses and its shops and its schools and its office buildings with these ceramic braziers, many of which were big, beautifully, brightly colored, and made to burn charcoal. And heat rooms, form focal points in rooms for people to gather and talk, until finally kerosene and electricity and gas replaced them. So once again, the question was, what do we make now? And a tone of modernity came in when the experimental station run by Hirano Sensei started bringing designers into the town to help design garden furniture and other large sculptural pieces. Again, large is the operative word. But if you ask almost any Japanese person about Shigaraki, the thing that comes to their mind most often is this particular figure, which is made by the tens of thousands in Shigaraki. It's called a tanuki. It's a animal, a raccoon dog from Japanese folklore that's famous for its craftiness. The raccoon dog carries a sake bottle in one hand and a notebook in the other, because he always can get a drink on credit. And so tanuki are seen outside bars and restaurants throughout Japan. But the big question for this community of specialists in making big jars nowadays is really what next? What other large ceramic containers are required by society today? And one response to this has been to become a kind of tourist destination where images of historical jars are now laid in tiles in the sidewalk and help you walk around the pathway that the tourist committee has designed. So it's a question that is once again facing these people, as it has many times over the 700 years that pots have been made here. Answers are not clear, but this is one place now to which I return with great interest and curiosity to find out what comes next in this place. So after publishing a book about Shigaraki, in a certain way winding up research there, I decided to go and look at the other side of ceramic production in India, in a town called Puri in the state of Orissa. And as you can see on the map, it's on the east coast of India, south of Calcutta. The reason to go there was that, unlike Shigaraki, which specialized in making the high-fired, hard, durable jars in the material we call stoneware, the kind of ceramic that lasts for centuries and centuries. Those jars from Shigaraki made in the 13th century, in some cases, were still in use in the 1950s. Earthenware is a different material altogether. It's porous, it's fragile. While it does survive in very ancient sites, that was not necessarily its real purpose. It is infinitely replenishable, and in the town of potters who worked outside of the small village of potters who works outside of the town of Puri, it was this capacity to reproduce infinitely the same shape over and over again in earthenware that gave meaning to their lives. They are a community of servants for the temple known as the Jagannath Temple, which is the major religious institution in the town of Puri. And it was in particular this connection of potters to a religious institution, a sense of performing their work within this religious context that I wanted to know more about. The temple draws pilgrims from all around India throughout the year, but especially in the month of July, just before the rainy season begins, when the famous car festival takes place. And the three deities from the temple are brought out onto the cars and pulled down the main street of the town. This is the event that gives us our word juggernaut, the invincible, forward-moving machine that's going to mow us down. That was the British view of this event. But on a daily basis, the three deities of the Jagannath Temple, represented here in a painting made in the town and now belonging to the International Folk Art Museum in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The three deities, who are avatars of Vishnu, but unusual in that they're made out of huge logs of wood, so representing a regional indigenous tradition. Three deities get 5 major meals a day, 5 delicious meals of rice and all sorts of side dishes. And these meals are cooked in the earthenware pots that the potters in the community outside of town makes for the temple. If you look hard down at the bottom, you can see little stacks of red pots. Those are the pots of cooked food being offered before the altar of the deities by the temple priests. And this food, once it's offered to the deities of the temple, becomes, it's theoretically consumed by the deities. It becomes then the leftover of the deity. And it is distributed to the pilgrims who come to take it, or to the families who live in the town of Puri, or to the temple servants who receive this as part of their privilege. And the idea of eating the leftovers of a deity is like eating the leftovers of your father or mother. It means you're part of a family, that the person who's given you that food is looking after you. This food is incredibly powerful, as people conceive of it, with the capacity to cure illness, to purify, to confer blessings, to absolve the dying person of all bad deeds in this present life. And most importantly, it allows all of the usual barriers between castes for people that would prohibit people from eating together to join together and eat in one place at one time. So this food that is the main operative principle of the daily ritual of the Jagannath temple is cooked in the pots. You can see one over on the left-hand side, made by the potters in this community of temple servants. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these pots made in the course of every year. Each of them is essentially the same, conforming to the rules that govern the kinds of pots that can be used in the temple kitchen, not subject to change, always red, beautifully fired to this shade of red, and always faceted, so they're distinguished from all the ordinary pots used in the marketplace. And it's these pots of this lovely red earthenware clay that are the products of the some 300 men in this community of temple servants. They start by throwing the basic shape on a huge wheel, and then the shape is modified using the paddle, the wooden paddle and the clay anvil, to take on the final rounded form with the faceting. And each man in the community makes dozens of these pots every day. The kiln that fires these pots is every bit as momentary in its nature as the pots themselves, which I should have explained must be discarded once they're used. They can only be used once. They are then tossed away respectfully, and a new clean pot is brought to the kitchen the following day. So the kilns, too, are built up of the stacks of the pots themselves. Then the stacks are covered with straw and smoothed over with a mixture of clay and cow dung until this beautiful sculpture of temporary nature is created as the fire is lit and the pots are fired in an overnight firing. And then, once cleaned, purified by that going through the fire, the pots are brought out and loaded onto carts and taken to the temple. And this purity survives until the moment when the pot is used and then is discarded. The people who led me and my collaborator, who I'd like to mention by name, Purnachandra Mishra, a local person from the town of Puri, through the history of this community, were these two elders of the Potters community who told us wonderful stories and gave me an entirely different sense of the nature of history. Because for these people, history starts in the present tangible day, but moves back very quickly into mythology and local lore. And these dimensions of their sense of their past are as important as what happened 5 years ago or 10 years ago and is recorded in the temple records. The temple records do go back for several years, and they talk about such practical aspects of the potters' lives as the induction of new young men who have become fully trained and are able to take up the mantle of the temple servant, the potter serving the temple, and carry on their family's work. But beyond this story, there's a wonderful story of the matriarch of this community, who some unknown number of hundreds of years past was so devoted in her duty of carrying the pots made by the men in her community from her distant village to the temple and back again, as well as caring for her children, caring for her house, that she never stopped to worship the deity of the Jagannath temple. And so one night, Jagannath came in a dream to the king and said, there's going to be a big fire in the middle of town. That land will be given to the potters so they can move closer to the temple and do their work with greater ease, and see me when I come out on my cart once a year. Beyond this wonderful story, the story of Nellie, there's the story that is recorded in a religious text called the Purana about the primordial potter who was created by the god Vishnu himself after all the other kinds of human beings had been created. And Vishnu realized to his dismay that they were all eating raw food and leading very uncomfortable lives. So he created the first potter named Rudrapala, who was then charged with making the cooking pots that would allow these beings to become fully human by eating cooked food. And it is this person that these potters in Puri ultimately see as their ancestor and the person whose creation justifies their own work in making their pots for the temple. And once a year, they have a festival that reenacts the story of this first potter. They clean their workshop and their tools. They prepare for the visit of the Brahmin on the left, who conducts a special ceremony within their workshop, reminding them of their special role in the story of human history and the story of the temple itself. The potters also at this time remember a story that may be even older, certainly is a regional story. When they clean and decorate their kilns, they remember the goddess who lives in their kiln, the goddess called Salehasuni, who makes sure that the pots are fired well, provided that she is given the proper kinds of attention and offerings. So there are many stories of this sort embedded in the day-to-day feeling of walking around this village. They're encountered with vividness that really makes it absolutely clear that they are a real part of the history of this community. The potters, on the days when they celebrate that festival, see themselves as being pure, purified, undefiled by the work they do in the rest of the year, which involves trampling on the earth and burning the earth and doing other things that lend them, in ordinary contexts, a very low status. So the story of these potters linked to the Jagannath temple has been finally one of the profound contradiction or division between the way in which they can see themselves as essential to human society through the tales that are told about them and to them, and the everyday struggles they have as one of many people of low status in the society who struggle to get along. The third focal point for research, long-term research, was quite different for me again, and focused on not just one country, but 4 countries of mainland Southeast Asia, as well as the province of Yunnan in southwestern China. And you can see Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam in dark red within the body of mainland Southeast Asia, and Yunnan is tucked just into that sort of crescent-shaped indentation by the borders with Laos and Myanmar and Vietnam. Now, the story of these potters is a very large story spread out over a wide space. I've done this work in collaboration with Leadham Lefferts, who's a cultural anthropologist, working in Thailand and a research associate with the Natural History Museum. And the setting for production here is not just one community, but hundreds of communities that are spread out over the rural landscape of mainland Southeast Asia. The wonderful part about research in mainland Southeast Asia, the incentive to do it was the discovery that this was not a story about earthenware alone or about stoneware alone, but about a place where both earthenware and stoneware are made and used side by side, as you see on this platform of a village house, and have separate roles, separate groups of people making the pots, but each has its own importance in the ongoing patterns of life. In mainland Southeast Asia, for the most part, earthenware on the left is made by women, and you may remember that she's using a very similar technique to the technique used by the men in India. Why that's the case is still a question to be answered. Women make earthenware, men make stoneware. These communities typically are not located in the same village. They're separate from one another, but there are many of them, and these represent the some 200 communities that Lidam and I have visited to find these communities. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Dan Cole at Natural History for this map. The reason for such a widespread study has to do with the nature of the society in mainland Southeast Asia, which is not a single social group as it is in the state of Orissa or the country of Japan, but is indeed a mixture of many, many different groupings of people that we call ethnic groups or ethno-linguistic groups. In fact, each of the countries that have been the focus of our research lists some 50 different groups of people within its borders. And so there's an open question of variation among the pottery production that goes on. The stoneware production focuses on large containers for long-term storage made by teams of men, teams of 2 men, and on a repertory of smaller pieces used for, again, storage of liquids, making rice beer, fermenting fish, and so forth. Things where the impermeability of stoneware is an asset. The pieces are fired in brick-built kilns that are shared by different teams of potters in the community. And they are used in particular under the eaves of village houses to collect rainwater against the coming of the dry season. Women make earthenware pots in their communities, under their houses, in between sending their kids off to school and bringing them back home and seeing that they do their homework. And the pots that they make are, for the most part, jars like the potter here is holding, containers for storing drinking water. The drinking water evaporates through the porous walls of the earthenware container and is cooled by that process, a very welcome drink in a hot climate. The technology of earthenware looks simple, perhaps, but it's extraordinarily refined and takes great skill to build a temporary platform like this one, pile up the pots, light the fire, and in 30 minutes be done. It's extraordinary to watch and humbling to watch. In a way, firing those big kilns is simple compared to this. The repertory of the women potters tends to be a standard shape in varying sizes. And the major uses for earthenware are drinking water containers, as on the left, under a house waiting for a guest to walk up and take a drink, or for cooking, as seen in a village kitchen in the highlands of central Vietnam. Now, it turned out to be the earthenware of mainland Southeast Asia that proved to be the most exciting and revealing an unexpected dimension of ceramic production in that region. Because whereas stoneware jars are largely part of a single technological lineage, regardless of where they're made in more or less the same way, following a certain pattern that goes back in time to a certain source, still to be identified. The finished earthenware pot, round-bottomed, rosy red pot, may look the same, but in the course of visiting villages and looking closely at women potters at work, it became clear that there are many, many different technological traditions hidden in the final form of the finished pot, but embodied in the very first step of how the pot is made. When the clay mass is first stretched or coiled or tweaked up into a form that can have the rim of the pot made on it. And so the motivation for us began to be to follow these particular patterns of technology wherever they led. We started in northeast Thailand, this area here, where there's still an extraordinarily diverse amount of pottery, earthenware production going on. But in order to follow those patterns, to see where they ended, we had to go into Laos, to Cambodia, to Vietnam, to Yunnan. And now we'll go into Burma if that becomes possible. So the questions about these diverse aspects of technology have everything to do with ethnicity, with language, with migration, such as we heard about in the past, as having taken place in the past. For example, one way to make an earthenware pot is shown here by taking a solid cylinder of clay, sticking in a thumb and opening up a hollow cylinder, then walking around that cylinder on a stump to make the rim. The potter then lets that dry for a while and uses paddle and anvil to close the open hole in the base and round out the bottom of the pot. This was what we ended up calling Type A earthenware production, simply because we looked at it first. And you can see that it's densely concentrated in the area that is northeast Thailand, and has to do in part with migration of potters into all these areas from one center where they had once lived some 200 years ago. So an opportunistic movement into areas that needed earthenware. There were many other ways, though, as I said, in which to reach that final round-bottom pot, such as this one, which involved making a flat base, coiling up the walls, making the rim, and then painstakingly rounding out the flat base to make a round base to the pot. This seemingly contradictory, illogical process suggests a close connection, perhaps, to the process of making stoneware on a potter's wheel. And this Type B earthenware production tends to be concentrated more in the northern areas of the mainland countries, and to be indeed closely connected to patterns of migration routes that we know from as early as the 10th and 11th centuries. But there were yet other ways that women made pots, including this process that involves no wheel at all, no coiling, just moving that wet clay around from one shape to another, pulling it up, and then making the rim on it, using the rib of a water buffalo, just the right shape, using that rib again to smooth out the flat base, and then using a scraper to remove the clay from the inside, excess clay. So quite a different approach with a different logic behind it to coming to this final round-bottom pot shape. And this Type C earthenware has a very curious distribution, mostly along the coast of south-central Vietnam, and then up into the central highlands of Vietnam in areas where people speaking similar languages live and where the traders from the coast are known to have gone back and forth, taking salt from the coast, bringing forest products from the interior. So there's a question about the relationship of the spread of this pottery technology to those areas. And then there's one little outlier along the coast of Malaysia, suggesting also a connection to insular Southeast Asia in both cases. So the overall picture that has come to take shape for us is a kind of image of history, of how people have moved within this region, but also how they've lived side by side and maintained certain distinct patterns of behavior over a very long time. So in summary, the research that I've been able to do has included the stoneware of Japan, and the earthenware of India, and the stoneware and earthenware of Southeast Asia, the secular context of Southeast Asia and Japan, the sacred context of India, the stability of potters who have stayed in one place for 700 years versus the migrations of potters from one place to another, the questions of gender, ethnicity, language. And all of these things that I've learned by these observations, I enjoy taking with me into museum galleries in order to play a kind of game when I'm looking at pots that are so finally on display in a context so removed from where they once were, by asking myself, as I look at a finished pot on view, who was the potter who made it? What was she aiming at? What was she thinking about? How did she know what she knew? Who had taught her? Who were her colleagues? Where did this pot go after she made it? All of those questions can come to mind, even in something that seems so removed from its origins, as it can for the stoneware jars, where I enjoy imagining the teams of men in Northeast Thailand making jars. But I also feel that in looking at these men in Northeast Thailand today, I can imagine 700 years ago, similar teams of men making jars in Shigaraki. So in conclusion, I want to say what an amazing privilege it has been, good fortune for me, to have by chance, come to the Smithsonian as a place to work, and in particular, to thank not only my mentors, my collaborators, my friends in villages, but the directors of the Freer and Sackler, particularly Milo Beach and Julian Raby, who have understood that research does not have to be tied narrowly in the first instance to some particular item in the collection, that it is fruitful to go out and look very widely, knowing that some way or another, those wide examinations, that unbounded kind of research that we are enabled to do here at the Smithsonian will eventually come back and inform our collections and inform the kinds of things we can say to our visitors. So that's my story, and thank you very much.